you're at. We're doing all right. Hating technology a little bit. Very, very much feeling that Luddite spirit this afternoon. Hope you are well wherever you are. Hope you had a nice 3-day weekend. Tomorrow, Matt and I are going to be going through our rogues gallery of terrible Martin Luther King takes. And then a little bit later in the show, we're going to be joined by our good friend Ben Burgess to talk about his new book. His new book on Christopher Hitchens, whose title is so simple and it always escapes my memory. But it's a great book. I finished it over the weekend and highly suggest y'all check it out as well. Again, no long pitch today because I took forever to get started. But happy to be taking everybody's questions from the chat and getting into a couple of stories. I'll be able to share things with y'all now, but a little bit lo-fi vibes, as you saw. Just had a complete disaster with the program that I'm trying to use for these, but this is cool. It's nice. I can see everyone's chat, so I'm keeping up with things. And let's get this going on. Yeah, I sabotaged my own stream because I'm a Luddite, and I think they're coming for us. If you missed it over the weekend for patrons, Matt and I did a watch party of this incredible crypto island documentary. Just one of the worst animated films I've ever seen in my life. And I regret to inform you that as much as I wanted Crypto Island to happen, Cryptoland, excuse me, it doesn't seem like these guys have it together. So, Lord, let me see what the best way to do this will be. Here we go. Don't do this to me, friends. They're coming for me, man. Okay. Does this work finally? I'm having a really bad tech day. I'm sorry for the delays, everybody, but here we go. Cryptoland runs aground as $12 million bid to buy Fiji Island for resort falls through. Plans by crypto evangelists for the lavish hideaway have courted mockery and controversy, and now the island is back on the market. Again, if you saw this over the weekend, you know, there we go. I'm not going to get stuck on that. You saw our deep dive into it over the weekend. You already know this. Max Oliver and Helena Lopez came up with this idea to build this crypto land, place out in the middle of Fiji, filled with just, it's a horrible mashup of just a really, really bad kind of like childish fantasy as to like what a elite destination would be, along with the typical stuff that you get with all this crypto nonsense. Extremely wasteful, reinventing the wheel, just no real thought about local community and the environmental impact of your stuff. Anyways, and of course, we can't forget some very, very weird statements about the age of consent on the island. But we're not here to focus on that. We're here to focus on this bit right here, because it does not look like they're actually going to be able to buy this island. The project appears to have hit a bigger hurdle than bad publicity. The real estate agent selling Nanu Iakake, Rick Kermode of New Zealand from Bailey's, told Garden Australia that the contract to sell it to Cryptoland's backers fell through this week, and the island was back on the market. We're telling people that it was under contract during the period of time that they had the contract, but it has come back on the market, he said. 220, 550 acres. Nanu Iakake sits about 1 kilometer off the northern coast of Viti Levu, one of Fiji's two main islands, and about 2.5 hours drive from the international airport. According to the listing, it offers a jetty, 5 beaches, and a luxury villa with a pool that sits on one of the island's highest points, with a magnificent 360-degree views, most particularly to the west over neighboring islands in the South Pacific Ocean. Anyways, this is basically just turns into a long advertisement for this property that they sort of thought that they had under contract and were going to be able to sell. And it turns out that these people didn't seem like they had their stuff together to be able to buy this island. That's not to forget the fact that these folks had already spent around $500 million on one of the worst videos I've ever seen. Just ridiculous animation, along with the fact that they stole a significant amount of footage that they used within this animation video. Again, if you haven't seen it, you can check it out over on our Patreon, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Matt and I did a whole deep dive into it. It's about a half an hour long video, and it's worth every second, because not only is this the kind of thing where it's fun to sort of laugh at these folks, but it really does show beyond just like the politics of it, like the very strange ideology that is behind a lot of this crypto stuff. And underneath it all is just a lot of hype without a lot of real material infrastructure. And the idea that they were trying to raise money already for plots of land on this island before they had it secured for themselves, I think just goes to show that these probably aren't going to be people who would be able to run a sewage system on an island in the first place. So yeah, I didn't think it was going to happen so quickly. But just 2 days after Matt and I released that long video, it doesn't seem like they're going to be setting up crypto land after all, which I have to say I'm sad about. I always thought that it was a great idea for these folks. I always thought that it was a great idea to get these folks on an island together. Yeah, it was $500 million for the video, the research, and like the plan. All, I don't know. I haven't looked at the books. Someone asked that in the chat. I haven't looked at the books yet, but I know that they had sunk $500 million into the project before, their big launch. So yeah, pretty incredible. People are trying to roast me about the Cowboys. Will not be going down that pathway today. Well, let's see. We have something here from Patrick, who says, and thanks for the super chat. Do you think celebrities supporting Bernie were a net positive or negative for him? Obviously, they have big platforms, but do you think their wealth hindered the campaign in becoming class rooted? That's an interesting question. I think I wouldn't be too worried about the celebrities as much as maybe some of the journalists, who attach themselves to a project like that. And, obviously for the vast majority of people with good intentions, but as a way to sort of dunk and destroy your enemies. I think that really hurt him in 2020. Not a kind of like, people weren't acting nice or whatever, but you could tell that it was very much 2020 was feeling more and more like a media campaign than 2016, which was very much an on the ground campaign. I still think, again, both 2016, 2020 were incredible moments and experiences. So I wouldn't fault them too much. But the second bit of your question is, you can use their platforms, but do you think their wealth hindered the campaign of becoming class rooted? Again, I don't think that would have been like the biggest hurdle for it being, a class rooted project. And, obviously, leaning on, celebrity can be something that's very, very beneficial. You look at somebody like Paul Robeson. I mean, a celebrity by any definition that you would use, an incredible, actor and football player and, public intellectual. Having him fighting for the socialist movement, I would never, for example, say that Paul Robeson was a hindrance to the movement. In fact, he made it, the socialist movement, the workers' movement, feel very global and international. I mean, there is some kind of dancing, I guess, that you have to do when you're talking, with somebody. And I love like the Cardi B stuff when that was going on. But, this was also somebody who was then later, getting worked up about how much they have to pay in taxes. And, there's a fair point to be made about what we don't get under our system right now. But obviously that is not a, the way Cardi B is framing it is not something that is very, very, relatable for most people, but I don't think that was a hindrance per se. But I think that's an interesting and a good question. I mean, I would say the Rogan rule, that we put together with Michael at CMBS when for example, we got the Rogan endorsement, I think is a good one. If Bernie, for example, was courting these endorsements in a way of changing his platforms or policies to be recruiting those people into the movement, then I think that that would have been one thing. But no, at the end of the day, I think that that was definitely just showed how positive and so many people wanted to be a part of that the movement that was going on. Um, no, it's okay. I mean, I'm used to the Cowboys losing in the playoffs. That's been most of my adult life. So let me see. Yeah, I think that was a big point that Michael made. Is like, I like I like the kind of inclination or like the way that Patrick's thinking is like, is this hurting us getting that kind of general, not just support right in a campaign, but actually building institutions that aren't. But I also think a lot of people on the left were very uncomfortable with seeing celebrities endorsing their candidate just because so many people have been so marginalized. So much of left wing socialist movement has been so marginalized in this country that it might have felt a little bit shocking for folks. Um, I think that this is a decent point, but remind me if I'm wrong. There's somebody said Sassy Koala says there's a certain amount of flakiness for celebs who don't see a lot of distance between like Bernie and Warren to be wary of. Again, I think that this was much more of a problem with like the journalist class than I guess like actors. But maybe I'm forgetting somebody or something. But that is genuinely how I would sort of portray it. I think if anything, the bigger problem was people seeing this as a way to launch their kind of personal careers, which I think that that was unhelpful, especially in 2020. Um, you know, you look at allies like Killer Mike, he has this that sweet influence, but is also politically forward and a strong leader to have in our ranks of the pop culture fight. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And like Killer Mike, I think has like some analysis that I wouldn't agree with. Um, but I think that he's just a genuine fighter, and he's somebody who can speak like nobody's business. I mean, that's somebody who will get a crowd fired up. And yeah, absolutely somebody you want to be showing up like he did in Alabama on the during the Amazon Union Drive as well. Um, I, let me I want to respond to this because I wouldn't support a Warren campaign in 2024, for example. Um, but Apuda says the shame is we don't have a good new left wing person to latch onto. I think that that's fair. Elizabeth Warren is good. I would highly disagree with that. But who knows if she ever runs again? Can't think of anyone else except for maybe AOC. I've seen people trying to come up with this sort of perfect candidate for the next presidential election. The one I like the most, I have to say, would probably be Cory Bush. But even there, I just think we have a lot more work to do, not just. And like building the popularity of our movement, but internally as a left movement. I mean, the problem that we're sort of facing right now is we have a lot of people identifying themselves as like democratic socialists or like maybe the more squishy version of progressive. And you're seeing that there's a pretty significant lack of unity, and you're also seeing a lack of connectedness to the grassroots, like working class movement or the working class as a whole, right? Like, I mean, where are the structures in place that would be able to organize us on a mass level? I don't see that right now. So I think sometimes the way that we think about politics in the U.S., especially on the U.S. left right now, is so tied to the presidency, and you understand why. I mean, that's an office that draws a lot of attention. It gets a lot of coverage. You can get your message out to a lot of people. But you got to remember what the Bernie moment was for a socialist movement was not. It's not like the formula in the sense of like we're just going to run up really great plucky socialists who stay on message and on brand, right? Absolutely. If if that's if we have a candidate, I think the Bernie style is the way to be, right? But the Bernie movement was a Hail Mary to try to jump over a lot of the kind of institutional and infrastructure that you need to build in order not just to win elections. And this is like, I know I hype on this again, but like winning state power is just the beginning of political transformation, right? It's not just that it's the first step, right? Um, it is like that's actually where the battle begins, because that's when we have some influence and some power to use against the entrenched forces, and those are entrenched forces. That's the state apparatus, right? That's the. I mean, a good example of this is think about how much continuity there is when it comes to foreign policy between Trump and Biden, right? There's some symbolic shifts, and there's some shifts that have like significant benefits for folks, but materially, a lot of them is similar, and that's not even because Biden and Trump like share a lot of values and views. It's because a lot of the American state at this point, and Danny Bessner was on the show last week, was talking about this. He made this point in the foreign exchange Substack that he runs. Um, um, is that like there's not that many people that are needed to basically continue the work of doing empire, right? Trump was supposed to be, people thought that Trump was just because of his incompetence, and the kind of things that he was saying on the campaign trails that like, well, there might be some shifts when it comes to American imperialism and American empire, and there weren't. And that has a lot more to do with the fact that a lot of those systems and structures really are on autopilot. So again, I bring that up to say that like these things, to change them, right? If you're somebody who's involved in politics, for fighting for working class people and also fighting against American imperialism, and warfare like abroad, right? We're going to need a much stronger movement. We're going to need a movement that's so much stronger than you have to have a movement that not only can like get the votes, but then once you have people in power, is able to mobilize the public so that we can get the things that we want, right? The reason that we have this advantage is that we have this sleeping power as members of working class to shut this whole thing down until we can get some major concessions and changes. And that's what happened, with the early American like civil rights movement. That's what happened to some degree with the populist movement, and that's what happened under FDR, right? And the FDR example and story is one that is a little bit more in depth, and I don't want to get bogged down on going through all of the history there. But the point is that when we've been able to get the most gains for working people, it's been when we had some sway in government and mass mobilization of the popular base. And how we build that, especially if we want to build it differently than the FDR coalition, because the FDR thing was, in a lot of ways, was like a top, ruling class of America reacting to the fact that the base of Americans were so mobilized and were demanding so much stuff that they needed to find a way to provide them some of the things that they needed, that the society needed, in order to prevent kind of really radical shifts from happening. And so if we want to do something a little bit different in our lifetime, right, not just wait for like some figure that we can from like the ruling class to sort of come into power, that we can then mobilize ourselves to sort of have them give us concessions. We need to be building a movement that is prepared to do that without even having necessarily like that leader, that person running for president. So I guess what I'm saying is like sometimes people getting really fixated on the presidential election, I think, can distract us from like the real base building work that we have in front of us. That in a lot of ways is a prerequisite for being able to achieve the things that we want. So again, I don't think that it would be a bad thing, for example, if we had somebody who seemed that they were creating a bit of fire, that we should support them in 2024, right? I think if something like that happens, it's worthwhile doing again. But I would sort of warn against forcing it when it's not there, because there's a lot of work that we need to be doing in the meantime. Yeah, and this is the point is like we need collective action to yield the popular momentum to the ballot box. Yeah, and what I'm saying is like you can see this. I talk about this a lot on the show if we have new viewers. I typically, when I do these talks on like building, I look at some examples that we have. So we are very familiar with the Bern example. Another one to think about is Syriza, right, which was a radical movement in Greece that comes into power against the austerity that was being forced down their throat. By the European Union, and they come into power. So ostensibly, like they have the state power, but they were unable to ride the waves of popular support that they had into being able to break with the European Union and being able to prepare people for what would have been it was already economic warfare between the European Union and Greece. But could you imagine if the Greek government had taken tremendous, like significant steps to sort of challenging the power of the European Union? How much more the European Union and particularly the Germans would have waged war against Syriza? For people who aren't familiar, before they had this big vote on whether or not they would accept another round of austerity, the EU and German banks, they shut down ATMs in the country. So people weren't able to get their money out. What does that say to you, right? That's a threat, right? That is a conflict with capital that people felt, and even still, they voted no on more austerity. But Syriza had not been able to build up the kind of movement that was going to be able to withstand the coming onslaught, right? And that's a lesson that we need to learn. So it goes much further than just our example of like, well, if only Bernie could have come into power. I think if Bernie would have come into power, it would have been, unfortunately, a very similar situation. I think we would have gotten a lot of things that are incredibly beneficial. It was worthwhile doing it. But I don't think that we were prepared to have that kind of final conflict with American capital, let alone kind of entrenched interest within the Democratic Party, right? And we just need to be aware of that to build something different. Any feelings on the Fetterman guy from Pennsylvania? I haven't. I think he seems fine. I don't think he's as radical as he might appear to be, but I think he's a pretty decent progressive, from what I understand. At least from the people who are running for Senate, probably one of the better ones, right? But I'm not a particular expert in him, so yeah. I mean, he seems cool, and like he's somebody, like, I think the stuff that he did in Braddock is very like honorable, and that's exciting. I just wonder, I get worried sometimes about how to interact with just genuine progressives as a socialist, because obviously a lot of that is preferable to what we get with the Binans. But I do wonder how much they're going to be able to move the ball forward. And so yeah. I'm just we have John Doe says they really like Fetterman. They think he has a real opportunity to appeal to blue collar voters. I mean, he seems like a very real dude. Absolutely. Um, upon democracy as an institution, anti-democratic sentiment has been allowed to take a foothold as Trump has been praised so much by the media, not living circumstances of the working poor. I mean, there's a lot of work to do, and I think reclaiming like democracy as a language too is super critical. Um, so Kevin says we have to rebuild the union, then a national leader can come later, but we have to rebuild state by state. Well, I think that these things don't have to like we don't have to like wait 15 years to develop. Like you can have somebody who rises up as a kind of national leader or spokesperson as we're doing this kind of work. But what I'm saying is that we have to just sort of see all of these things as connected and really start building amongst ourselves and institutionally those connections, so that so that there's a little bit stronger of a link um, between the really exciting progressive work that's going on in New York, and the exciting progressive work that's going on in Texas, and all across the country, so that instead of having to be like, okay, we're just going to focus our attention on all these like smaller things, that there's a rootedness in your local community and in the fights that are directly around you, right, to incorporate more people more than anything. But we don't have to. I don't know. We can do a couple things at the same time. Also, building a national presence, I think, is very important. And we don't have to wait 15, 20 years for that to happen. We can have a national leader who helps build those things up for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's too much worry anymore about Tulsi. I think that Tulsi Gabbard has sort of exposed herself for what she is, somebody who's very comfortable with the right wing and seems to have very loose commitments to any kind of left wing socialist principles. Um, I'll read this from Strom. He says FDR was a demon. Remember the 1934 textile strike? I mean, I wouldn't go as far. I'm not somebody who thinks that. I think that FDR certainly represented like a placating of a lot of working class, actions and attitudes. Um, I think that this kind of like, I think that you can get. I think that FDR represented a positive, progressive um, trend in American like liberalism and that kind of progressive movement. I think that is extremely limited, and I think the fact that it's sort of been so undone, I think, proves the problem with that approach. I think saying something like that makes it seem like you don't want to learn anything from that movement or time, and I think that that would be a mistake. Um, but yeah, he was a rich guy. He was a rich guy who was able to rally and utilize a lot of popular support and popular movement, though, and I think that that's something that's worthwhile. And I also think that we're much better off for FDR presidency than the kind of more right wing alternatives. Absolutely. If it closed, if the argument is that it closed the door on some left wing stuff, I think that that's a fair point to make. But I don't know. I think that sometimes the super moralistic, fire and brimstone language isn't really the best way to think about history like that. Um, I can't get onto this YouTube thing right here, um, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Yeah, so people were talking about Kenyatta in Pennsylvania. Frankly, I haven't been following the race there, so I'd be very happy to hear what folks are saying. Well, Kale's over here telling us the truth. Kale Brooks over at the Jackman channels in the chat saying that we absolutely want Fetterman over Kenyatta. Kenyatta's the PMC war night candidate. So there we go. Thanks, Kale. I wish I could just pop you in over here to help us break that down. um, I'm following these down. Um, okay, well, I got some videos and stuff to play. I'm trying to just get down because I'm a little bit behind the chat. I know. Um, yeah, this is that's Kale Brooks from Jackman over here telling us the truth. Um, So, I think that this kind of stuff would be a waste, like a Marianne Williamson run. I don't think it's worthwhile to do it. I think Bernie was very much an exception to this kind of thing, and I think that that'd be a pretty significant mistake. Kowalski over here speaking the truth. Um, Um, it was the New Deal or fascism. FDR was probably the best president we've ever had, but that doesn't mean he was great. And I think that we can work through that. And Kale says next time he'll come on. Sounds good, brother. Um, let's see. All right, well, let me play some of these because we have some. I think that's very nice. I appreciate that from Fallout Bender. But let me put up some stuff with y'all because I think that we have some. There's some stories I want to get to. And I want to talk about this blame the voter thing that was the title. I know I got a later start, so I might need to go a little quicker because I have to get out soon. But um, again, I mean, I think the lesson there though is like I do think like having somebody potentially popular, if we are so lucky to have somebody who wants to call themselves a socialist first and foremost is a non-starter for me. I don't think it's worthwhile for us to be putting up somebody as like the leader of this movement who won't even say that they're an anti-capitalist and a socialist, right? I think that could end disastrously for us. That's how you just start to become a pressure group. Um, but two, I think that we need to be much more worried about building up our strength and power rather than sort of searching through 300 million plus folks for the next, good, person to be on TV for us. I'd love to hear. Matt and I want to do some more stuffs on the Civil War. I mean, Lincoln was absolutely a fascinating character, as people know. Um, Conversed and wrote letters with Marx. I think some people sometimes overstate that, but had definitely written some things that seemed like he was at least interacting with some of Marx's theories. I do wonder. What would have happened if we were to do a counter history or something like that had Lincoln not been assassinated? Would he have had the power and the ability to push through Reconstruction? Because really, a lot of American politics after the Civil War, in my opinion, it really is the failure to push for a more radical Reconstruction policy, to really do the kind of reforms, not just to the economy, but to the social structure that were needed. And we didn't, and without having that, I think we're worse off for it, and we're still sort of having those fights. I mean, we're talking about right now, voting rights again. I mean, this goes all the way back to the Civil War. We needed to have federal control of elections then, and we need federal control of elections now. A lot of these fights that we have today, is what I'm saying, are rooted in that moment. So, had in a kind of counter history, Lincoln not been assassinated, I do wonder if he would have been able to go even further with the radical Republicans. Because one of the great tragedies of American history is that the radical Republicans, within a few years, just start giving up on this fight, and they start moving their attention primarily to the to the Northeast and Northeast capital. So we'd like to do that sometime soon. There's Kale's thoughts there. Sorry, Kale's thoughts there. All right, let me do this this story right quick for y'all, because I think this is something that is worth paying attention to. It's funny to hear the way a lot of some people on the left talk about, are talking about agents and journalism. There's a kind of very conspiratorial view that some folks have, that people who they might not like for whatever reasons, they have bad opinions because they're being paid by bad actors. And while I think there are a lot of people out there who have bad opinions, I think that sometimes people sort of overstate or overimagine just how much effort and money is spent to legitimate to pay somebody and have them say one thing or the other, like to pay somebody to sort of, as people say, shepherd them into less radical and revolutionary groups. I just think that's a funny focus when there has just been a onslaught on local journalism across this country for decades now that does end in just mass misinformation rings. So this is from Molly Taft in Gizmodo. Chevron is hiring journalists for its newsroom. And they sort of joke around at the top. He says, your dream job awaits, climate journalist. The oil giant is looking to hire new people with journalistic experience to build out a newsroom. And Molly notes here, the new venture was first reported by E&D on Friday, that one of their reporters was approached by SELA, the staffing agency doing the hiring for Chevron. The recruiter told the staffer that the job is a great opportunity to join Chevron's newsroom at its infancy. When the E&E reporter asked what topics the position would write about and if climate change would be included, the recruiter said it would be covering all things Chevron. The original job listing, titled Business Writer, Oil and Energy, was posted to LinkedIn by SELA and doesn't mention Chevron by name. Other postings from SELA for an editor-in-chief and a creative director mentioned an oil and energy client. A spokesperson for Chevron confirmed to Earther in an email that the posting was for a gig at the oil and gas giant. And you get a bunch of corporate nonsense speak over there about what this is. But they note here, this is good reporting from Molly, producing in-house communication and paid media as a corporate strategy is on the rise. We talk about that a lot on this show. I did a whole episode on Shell's insane podcasts that they've been promoting about about climate change, right? And they're presenting it as if like we're getting experts from both sides to talk about the difficult questions, right? And if you're not paying attention, it might even seem like they're being progressive because they're talking about how, oh yeah, oil's not the future, et cetera, et cetera. But then you get these kind of hard shifts where they say that, reducing the amount of oil that we're pumping out of the ground, that we're taking out of the ground, is a social justice issue because, people in poor communities need that oil. And, it's just like this way that they're trying to act like they're sort of dancing seriously with the solutions when they're absolutely not. They're just doing propaganda to try to distract. But this is notable right here. Because producing in-house communications and paid media as a corporate strategy is on the rise. It's definitely worth noting here that Chevron has a very specific history of paying to create news, extolling the company's virtues. Most notably, Chevron pays for a newspaper in Richmond, California, where a Chevron refinery has foisted pollution on predominantly Black and Latino communities for decades. The Richmond Standard, which has a footer disclaimer that it's funded by Chevron and aims to provide a voice for Chevron products company on civic issues, was started after the refinery exploded in 2012, the third time it had done so. So let me bring us over there for a moment so y'all can see what's going on at the Richmond Standard. Because again, it's very, very subtle, but very worrying, right? They're filling in this gap that we're seeing all across the country right now when it comes to local journalism. Most local journalism is aggregated. It's just a lot of reprints, and you're having people. If you have local reporters at all, they're typically on 10, 15 different beats. It's almost impossible for them to do the kind of on the ground investigative reporting that's necessary to inform people in the community about the abuses that you're getting from corporations, to inform people in the community about the fact that that Amazon facility that's moving your neighborhood is not actually going to do all those nice things that Amazon is promising for you, right? You get a lot of people who do local journalism, and it's because they're super busy, and some people, I think it's lazy and ideologically an ideological deficit too. You just have kind of like printouts of what's purported to them. They're just doing printouts of press releases from corporations. This is a whole other level, though. So this is like, again, they're trying to fill in this space. It's fairly typical stuff. It doesn't seem too offensive. Richmond church volunteers pack over 10,000 meals on MLK Day. Nice. Education, apply now. And this is where it gets funny, right? Apply now for Chevron Richmond's Black History Awareness Scholarship, right? And again, as Molly Taft notes in the original piece, this is in a community where this refinery has been polluting the area. So it's notable that, you're not really getting anything on the environment in the community. You do have a crime section, entertainment, food, rich life, the rich life you get to enjoy when you're Chevron employee. But I think this is worthwhile. Oh, we got volunteering over here. It's notable to see that there, these kind of shifts from Chevron and from these oil companies into this kind of, nicer rebranding that they've been pushing, right? That, oil and gas is not a, direct threat to the planet, and also a threat to the communities where it's being produced right now. It's just the kind of friendly neighbor who wants to make sure that that you can volunteer at Richmond's Little League fields. Again, this happens, this doesn't just happen in a vacuum, though. Like, this happens, because capitalism has basically made, traditional models of journalism completely fall on their face. Local journalism, for the most part, is dying, across the country. And that has very, very serious consequences. Not just in the sense of like, okay, well, people aren't, civically minded or anything like that, because it also opens up the space for companies like Chevron to come into communities. People need to get some news, right, about what's going on around them. It allows companies like this to sort of come in and control the narrative, right? And this is a big kind of like standing right in your face example, right? Chevron's funding your local newspaper. But this happens all across the country, right? And more often than not, those kind of donors are not recognized on the masthead. So, shout out to Molly Taff for pointing that out. And yeah, if let me know if anyone who's watching this later is watching right now is from Richmond, California. Tell me how many people are sort of interacting with that kind of stuff. Yeah, Slayton, where are you at? Uncle Slayton says there's one independent daily remaining in my entire state. I mean, we're seeing that die all across, um, the country. I mean, luckily we have publications here in Texas, like Texas Observer, but I've seen in my lifetime, a lot of these publications being threatened. And Texas Observer certainly deserves a much larger budget than they already have. Um, Sassy Koala says, "Wonder if they'd report on fracking poisoning water wells." I highly doubt that. Um, I mean, I don't think this is a big secret anymore. Sean says, "Can anyone deny that Clinton, Obama, and Biden have worked hand in glove with Wall Street establishment to incrementally roll back the New Deal and labor union remnants?" Yeah, but I'll tell you what, they've been doing this even before Clinton. I mean, Carter's the real beginning of this neoliberal turn, um, and Clinton had did a significant amount of damage, but I think it goes back even further than that. Um, Do you think it's a matter of not adopting to new technology, or people just expecting free information? I mean, I think the big problem is how you fund local journalism. That model's starting to break when things become cheaper and easier. I mean, it's hard to have funding for these things, but I think it would also be a mistake um, to say that it was the internet in and of itself that caused like the end of the newspaper era, right? This was happening way before. It was mass conglomeration of it was this hyper concentration of the news industry. This was happening in the 90s, right? You could watch old C-SPAN videos where they're complaining about the very same thing, right? Um, the point is not that there's not money in local news. I mean, the thing is, like, the people who own all these local news, especially local cable news, um, local, Fox affiliates, etc. They make a decent amount of funds. There was also a kind of tendency for accumulation and monopolization of local news too. Um, so I mean, I can't sit here and work through the whole thing, but the history of local news. But like, I think that sometimes people. Um, I think that most sometimes this is like where a lot of times like technology narratives can sort of replace more structural narratives, right? The whole, like, everyone knows that argument now. It's like, well, everyone was on the internet, so then local news start failing. And I'm not saying that wasn't a big factor, but I think that it also sort of flattens and simplifies a problem that was going on before that too. Um, all right, here we go. Well, let me pull up while we're on that, right? I think that this is a good place to go, so that we can get to uh, this next bit here. You're going to have to be patient for me, because if you were late, or I was late, I had some big issues trying to keep up um, with this new system. So let me see. I think we have one of them. I just want to get the other one right quick, and then we'll be good to go. I have two videos here. This first one is Saki, and y'all might have seen it already. But let me just see if I can get it. I had a few different. That'd be a real bummer if I lost this. I had a pretty bad tech malfunction before we went live. All right, well, let me play this for y'all and we can come back. Because I think this is. I want to talk a little bit about the Biden administration before we go, because we haven't done it a little bit. I'd be curious to hear more about this on the other side. Middle Doctor says, I think the U.S. Relative wealth has combined with localism to balkanize the working class. I'd be curious to hear more about the that theory there. All right, let's play this first. This is Saki. Y'all probably have seen this by now, but it's a good launching point for this moment that we're in, because I think that 2022 is going to be really weird politically. I think that the Democrats are walking into a bloodbath right now. And what's been interesting to watch, though, is their willingness to let this happen, and the new kind of strategy that they followed in sort of dealing with the legitimate failures of the Democratic Party and the Biden administration. So here we go. Comrade Saki to the rescue.
I had a couple specific ones, but I wanted to kind of follow on that. As you're determining next steps, I mean, frankly, things just seem like they're going pretty poorly right now for the White House. Build Back Better is being blocked, voting rights is being blocked, diplomatic talks with Russia doesn't seem to have brought us back from the brink of war. Inflation's at a 40-year high. The virus is setting records for infection. So as we kind of hit this 1 year period, and a period where everything seems like it's in pretty rough shape, or nearly everything, which is not an invitation, I guess, to list off some other things. I'm wondering, at what point do you take stock and say that things need to change internally, whether it's your outreach toward the Hill, whether it's the leadership within the White House? You seem to be stymied on an incredible number of fronts right now.
Well, let me give you a little bit of a different take on this. More than 200 million people are vaccinated. We've had a record job growth, record low unemployment rates historically in this country over the last year. We've rebuilt our alliances and our relationships around the world. And right now, as it relates to Russia, as you heard our National Security Advisor convey, we're working with partners around the world to convey very clearly. It's up to them to make a choice about what's next. We're not going to make that on their behalf. It's up to them to determine if there are going to be crippling economic sanctions or not, or if they decide to move forward. But we also recognize when you have a small margin and threshold in the Senate, it's very difficult to get things done and to get legislation passed. And the fact that the president, under his leadership, got the American Rescue Plan passed, a bipartisan infrastructure bill with 19 votes in the Senate, about 6 votes in the House, the fact that we are still continuing to work with members to determine the path forward on Build Back Better, that we have the vast majority of Democrats in the Senate supporting voting rights, that's a path forward for us. And our effort is to do hard things, try hard things, and keep at it. So we just don't see it through the same prism.
So the sense is things are going well, there's no need for change right now.
I think that having worked in a White House before, you do hard things in White Houses. You have every challenge at your feet, laid at your feet, whether it's global or domestically. And we could certainly propose legislation to see if people support bunny rabbits and ice cream, but that wouldn't be very rewarding to the American people. So the president's view is we're going to keep pushing for hard things, and we're going to keep pushing the boulders up the hill to get it done.
Well, that's that, right? I mean, you guys all appreciate that, I'm sure, that they're not just proposing bunnies and ice cream in Congress. I mean, let's be fair here. I mean, this is somebody whose job it is to put a positive spin on something that's sort of hard to put a positive spin on. Not only has Biden not been able to get through the kind of, the signature parts of his agenda, right? Build Back Better, etc. What is going on right with COVID right now is just a complete disgrace. And all that you're getting from the Biden administration regarding this so far has been this kind of look on the bright side shtick, which is not very, very convincing, except for a few of the most deranged, diehard fans of the Democratic Party. They could have and should be pushing for payments to people they should never have let the child tax credit expire, and they should have been much, much more proactive in being able to build up the institutional ability to deal with waves, which we just know at this point are going to be coming, right? It's truly amazing. It's also, I will say, the one thing though where there's this great kind of unity, though I have to say he might be doing a little bit better, is between Biden and Trump talking about the vaccines. I don't know if y'all have been seeing this, but there is just a complete coup going on within the right-wing movement, where Donald Trump has been pushing, how great he finds the vaccines. They're so great. What an incredible miracle. And he's really pissed off that his people aren't giving him any credit for it. So, anyways, very funny. I think if you were to sit there and in a different world where Trump was on Twitter, I could imagine that he would be claiming, wanting to take all the credit for what's going on with the vaccines and vaccine rollout. But anyway, I think that it's just been it's been disastrous. And, beyond that, the message that we got from the White House going into the winter season, remember that, was that this is what's coming now is, a period of like death and destruction for those who haven't got vaccines, and, good times for the rest of us. Well, we know that's not the case now. And they made this bet that I think was a terrible one. And they should be utilizing the moment right now to getting more for the American people. Let me play this clip from Paul Begala too, and then we can get into all of this stuff with the Biden administration, right? Because this is a very regular argument that's being had across the country between kind of centrist Democrats and lefties. I hope that this works. If not, I'll just walk us through it. But let's see if I can get this audio to play for you.
And the words of the daughter-in-law of Martin Luther King Jr., Andrea Waters King. This is what she told Politico, quote, "What we have seen with President Biden is what happens when he puts the full force and power behind an issue like infrastructure. What we want to see is that same power and passion being put behind voting rights." Do you think that's fair criticism? Did President Biden put more effort into getting infrastructure passed, for example?
Well, he got infrastructure passed, and that's a good thing because success can breed success. He is putting the full force of the presidency behind it. I think the problem for the Democrats right now is not that they have bad leaders. They have bad followers. Okay, I read the most amazing essay today from Andy Young. Andy is former mayor of Atlanta, former UN ambassador, and more importantly, probably the closest confidant and aide to Dr. King. He told this story. December of 1964, Andy Young and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. go to see Lyndon Johnson to push him for a Voting Rights Act. Johnson says, "I can't do it. I used all my power to get the Civil Rights Act done last year. I don't have the power to push Congress any further on voting rights." As they left the White House, Andy Young's words, he said, I asked Dr. King what he thought. He said, "I think we got to go get the president some power." And so you know what they did? They organized, these are Andy Young's words, we mobilized the churches, the universities, the labor unions, the business community, a coalition of people of goodwill. In other words, those of us who want to save voting rights, we need to get to work. I do think Biden is putting everything behind this, but he needs better followers. So he needs all of us in the game as well.
I remember what he said about the power of big business in that moment in moving the hand of politicians. Alyssa, there are zero.
I love that clip so much. Man, I'll tell you, pop-up ads, I thought that they had made those illegal a while ago. That's an incredible clip. I also love the fact that they end. I mean, that's like Zizek voice, that's pure ideology right there. And especially I love the last bit is that yes, at the end of the day, it's like we can only do so much. If we can just get business to support us, then things will change. But I want to play that full clip because the shorter version where he blames, he says the Democrats have bad followers has been making the rounds on Twitter. And I think it's worthwhile to listen to the whole thing as what he's trying to say, because it actually doesn't make it any better. Let me point out a few things, right? Let's just start with where the Biden administration is at, and then this kind of argument about the bad followers, and then Psaki sort of saying that, anybody demanding anything else is sort of talking about ice cream and rainbows and bunnies, right? I make this point all the time that when Trump was able to make inroads with communities that you wouldn't expect him to make inroads with, working class communities, and particularly working class communities of color, right? Here in South Texas, that was a big storyline. Again, he doesn't win those communities, but he makes massive inroads over Biden on. And when they went and they did the postmortems and they said, why did Biden lose support amongst people who you think would vote for him automatically? It was all stuff like this. That guy, Donald Trump, sent me $1,200. That really helped me get my head above water. That helped me out a lot, right? And then what did you get from the Biden administration? A complete sprinting away from that policy, when he's in office, right? Instead of actively fighting for these things that are extremely popular. All of the things that, we're talking about voting rights, the social programs that were in the more ambitious versions of the Build Back Better, right? These were things that were popular with people. People want to see spending right now from the government. They want to see a child tax credit. They want to see Medicare for all, right? They have all these policies that are extremely popular with the average American voter, and there is zero outreach and zero energy being spent, to trying to bolster this kind of popular support for these things, right? So when Begala is going on here and saying that Biden doesn't have good followers, right? The Democratic Party doesn't have good followers. I'm gonna tell you right now, he's full of shit, because it's there is plenty of support amongst people for these shifts. There is no outlet that seems viable for people to be able to express that desire, because they've seen everything that they need to see from the Biden administration, that it has no real intention of fighting for any of this stuff, right? We think, obviously, on this side, that we need Medicare for all. That is the only moral choice. Frankly, it's also the only point that makes sense economically for dealing with the healthcare crisis in this country, right? But you remember how much effort that they put to squashing the popular support for something like Medicare for all in the Democratic Party? They did everything they could to confuse people about it. I mean, remember during the 2020 primary, how much like lying and doublespeak you were getting from Biden, from Buttigieg, from Harris on this stuff, right? Medicare for all who want it, right? Remember that nonsense? Regardless, they do the move against Bernie, and Biden comes into power. Have we seen any mobilization on the Biden plan? Remember, Biden had a healthcare plan too. The difference between Bernie and Biden, apparently, back in those days, was just that Bernie wants to go a little bit further than everybody else, but everyone agrees we need to do something about it. We're living through a global health pandemic, and there has been shit significantly done on healthcare, right? Let alone the good option, the Medicare for all option, even the kind of limping, pathetic, sad version that Biden ran on. We haven't seen any real movement on that, right? And what are we getting right now? We're getting another period of of mass crisis from the COVID pandemic, and we're not getting these kind of the aid that we need. We're seeing people losing their homes. We're seeing people get evicted. We're seeing people feeling under threat. And what we're getting from the Biden administration is a complete capitulation to the capitalist class. That's what's going on right now with the fact, that they're now telling people that they need to go back to work even if they're tested positive, right? They're telling people you only need 5 days instead of the typical 14 days, right? I mean, that is just from a public health perspective irresponsible. But it is something that is being motivated by the fact that the Biden administration is much, much more sympathetic and reactive to the whims of the ruling class. I mean, they got a call from the airline industry. Right, they had meetings with the airline industry when they first started moving back those restrictions. Right, that's not believing the science. That's believing. That's believing in corporate power and believing, what you're taking marching orders from the people who truly, call the shots in this country. But look, what we're seeing from Begala is just the new move that we're going to get from this kind of centrist liberal class of people who have an outsized platform in the media, right? This is just like the less clever version of "Don't Boo Vote," right? We need better followers, not better leaders for this party. Despite the fact that, again, we're a year in, from the most historic and important election of our life, and we have just seen fumble after fumble, and it's pretty impressive to see Trump, who seriously mismanaged this, sort of go toe to toe with Joe Biden when it comes to dealing with this pandemic, because both of those guys, I think you can give them a pretty solid F here. And Biden is not making much effort, in my opinion, to go much further. But let's go to the second bit. Actually, no, I want to say one more thing about that, and I'm going to come to chat. I appreciate y'all. I want to go into two things. I want to talk about the 50 vote threshold in the Senate, and we'll get there in a second. But I did want to talk about the demeanor and the way that people like Bukala, a lot of the people who are big supporters of Harris and Buttigieg and Biden, what they really are standing for right now is this idea. Their entire 2022 campaign right now seems to be revolved around the idea that you guys are just too ungrateful. And don't you remember how bad the Orange Man was? Don't you remember how embarrassed you were when he did the tweets? I mean, he did tweets. He did those tweets. And he made the office look like a joke, right? Not like us who come into power and don't do much for y'all. Not like us who've spent our entire lives working in this system and in these institutions and have very, very little to show for it. We're not the ones who are disgracing the office. It was the bad man, right? I don't know. Trump's a fucking pig, and thank God that we're rid of him. And what's worrying is that it doesn't seem like, you know, he's gone away for good because they are just so incompetent when it comes to. I mean, we're not even talking again about the social change that we need. It's just like basic running of a system and a government, right? And again, the move that we're seeing from this party and its talking heads and its acolytes is that voters are ungrateful. The American people are ungrateful. You're demanding too much. You want bunnies and rainbows, right? These are things that can be done. It's not bunny and rainbows to say, why is Biden increasing the amount of drilling on public lands, beating out Obama and Trump? I thought he was the one who believed in science, right? These are things under his control. This is not Congress. These are things under his control, the shifts that we're seeing. Why is under the Biden administration, and thank God, the one good thing that he did was pulling out of Afghanistan, but why are we seeing this double humanitarian disaster right now where the United States is working to cut off the people of Afghanistan from international aid? I mean, that's devastating. That's causing mass starvation. I mean, and this kind of liberal, disgusting fantasy with war for Russia, which, the delusion of NATO, which we're feeling closer and closer and closer that we're getting to the brink, right? Where is there any kind of positive message that we're seeing from them? It's completely gone to this point where it's literally just got completely naked and callous. What the Democratic Party stands for. The Democratic Party is standing for, we are not the worst fascists in this country. That's sort of where we're at right now. And if you say anything else, it's not the time, because you can't say anything, because if you criticize them, then you're just aiding the right. I'll tell you right now, what aids the right more than anything is you coming into power saying that we're going to do change, coming into power saying that we're going to right the ship after the disaster of Trump, and spending time and power and doing very, very little for people, and then lecturing them and acting like it's absurd for people to ask for more. I'm less worried about many people who voted Biden necessarily going super far to the right or anything like that. I'm more worried that people just start checking out because this was the most important election of their lifetime, right? This was a real opening, right? And there was all this enthusiasm at the beginning of the Biden administration that, yeah, he might not be the guy you expected, but he was going to shake things up a little bit because they learned their lesson after the conditions that let Trump come into power. They did it. Let me just say one thing about this 50-50 business, right? One, I talked about the thing. There's a hell of a lot that the Biden administration could be doing, right? On the executive front that they have refused to do. A hell of a lot they have refused to do. And the argument you get from them from time to time is, well, we don't want to start creating a precedent where we do this and then the right wing does it, right? The right wing already will do it. The right wing already has done it. I think that's a non-argument. I think that's a waste, and it's a cheap excuse. The second of which, going back to Begala's point, that the Democratic Party doesn't have proper followers, right? The followers aren't good. The leadership is great. Oh, so sweet. Biden just sitting at his desk saying, oh, it's so hard. He has so much, on his back, and we're just not doing enough for him, right? Again, that's bullshit. If you're talking about something like in the reference of that clip, right? He's reacting to being pushed back about the fact that Biden hasn't shown up for voting rights. If you're going to sit here and say that the followers haven't been showing up, that there hasn't been movement on civil rights and justice in this country, you're full of shit. There has been plenty of uprisings. We lived through this mass moment where it seemed like mass politics was opening up and was feeling very possible in this country. Um, and you didn't see, are they utilizing that energy or that feeling? Absolutely not. Are they saying to people in real ways, not in this kind of like really quiet, whispered? The only people who watch press conferences are people who are obsessed with politics. The only people who watch these, even the talking head shows, even CNN, a lot of cable news, are people who are really, really, really invested. Think about how many, regular people are getting any kind of messaging from this administration that they're really fighting for these popular things. If you have massive popular support for this stuff, you need to be utilizing. You need to be utilizing that in the way that, for example, FDR did, right? When it comes to even the story that Begal is talking about with LBJ as a politician understood that when he had the opportunity to stand and meet the demands of folks, he absolutely would do it. I mean, this is just like politics 101. Utilize the base that you have to get the popular support, to pressure the people in power into doing what you want. There have always been people who are obstructionists in Congress, right? In fact, the Senate is essentially an organization that's set up to obstruct the popular will. To overcome that, you need to build up mass movements of popular support. And of course, you're not going to get that from Biden for a whole myriad of reasons. But again, to sit here and say that it's because the followers are bad and not the leadership, that's bullshit. Last thing I just want to say about this 50-50 thing that you get it like those little weirdos, those weird guys on Twitter who have like the globe emoji around them, the proud neoliberal freaks. And they say like, oh, we would love that. That's why we need to get 51, 52 Democrats in the Senate, 55, right? We need to get more Democrats elected, and then we can get all of these things. I'll tell you one thing. It'll be 52. Once it's 52, it'll need to be 55. When it's 55, need to be 60. When it's 60, it'll need to be 70. There are always people within that party who are willing to break up and if not completely obstruct these kind of bills, water them down to a point where they are almost useless for the intended for the people who would benefit from them. Beyond that, though, why do you think that we have such low such a low turnout for the Biden administration? Sorry, why do you think that the Biden administration did not kind of sweep in with these massive numbers? I'll tell you right now, it's this bullshit suburban strategy. It's their anti-democratic strategy. They love to point the fingers at the progressives. The progressives demand too much. They've asked for too much. That's why we're in the moment that we're in. And the Democrats are trying so hard, to appease the left-wing flank of the party that they've now alienated the center. That is just a load of horseshit. You see a movement of people, right? And again, look, I'm a socialist. I don't think that our project should at all be about reforming and fixing the Democratic Party, right? I think that the Democratic Party is an impediment to proper social change here. But let's just understand this from somebody's perspective who might just consider themselves to be like a progressive, right? And you want to see the Democratic Party succeed. Can you tell me how this formula makes sense? You see a mass movement of people who say that they want to do something different, that mobilizes people who don't typically vote, people who don't typically involve themselves in the democratic process. And the party itself changes the rules and organize itself in a manner to completely stifle and isolate and to destroy that movement of energy and popular grassroots support, right? I mean, think about it. The Bernie people are mad, the Warren people are mad too. And like, they're even more like locked into that system, right? The Democratic leadership has done everything that they can do to completely isolate and attack and squash this mass movement demanding more democracy, right? This mass movement advocating, again, some of the most popular policies in the country, policies that I think have a radical tone to them and could be utilized in a way that's very radical, but again, very much fit within like a reformist model of like capitalism, right? They did everything they could to squash that grassroots movement, and then they wonder why they're not winning landslide elections, right? They're wondering why they're having such a hard time gaining majorities and holding on to large majorities in Congress when their entire party and project in the most public races that they have, which are the Democratic primaries, they spend all of their time trying to destroy and squash the popular movements, the grassroots movements within them. I mean, come on, it doesn't take a really smart person to get this. Beyond this, specifically about what Biden's strategy was in 2020, the suburban strategy is a disaster for the Democratic Party. It might work from time to time, just to put the cards on the table so people know what I mean. Biden, they ran a campaign where they tried to win, particularly in Texas and Georgia, right? They started trying to focus their energies to these kind of wealthier, whiter suburbs that traditionally vote Republican, thinking that Biden could appeal to them because that portion of the Republican electorate was very tired of Trump. Right? They weren't tired of conservative policies and right-wing policies, but they weren't that into the Trump style and mode of delivery of it. They spent all of their effort trying to win over those voters, and they lost voters in traditional blue working class communities across the country, right? We talk about Texas, but you see in Pennsylvania, right? Mike Davis has a really, really great piece on that in the New Left Review, as does it's a Dylan Riley, Fault Lines. Apologize. I can find it later for people. If you want to ask me, I'll send it to you. It's a great piece. But it looks at what happened with these kind of more traditional union communities. They left Biden in 2020. And yeah, Biden took the $200,000 a year set. But do you know what that group of people did? They voted for a Republican for Congress, and they voted for a Republican for the Senate. I mean, is it that... These are not loyal voters that you're getting over to your project, right? So don't come at me with your 50-50 bullshit when you're talking about the moment that we're in. Oh, Biden can't do anything. Oh, it's just like, oh, the circumstances are so rough. And what you really need to do is just be a better follower, right? Because we got the good leaders. I'm going to tell you right now that your entire project has been poisoned, and it's been poisoned for a long time. And we are living through the consequences. My life has been the consequences of the failure of this party. From Bill Clinton taking away food from my family when he was cutting welfare, to Obama squashing this incredible moment that we had in American history where people were challenging the system in the wake of the financial crisis, when people were finally felt that we had gotten somebody in power who was going to do something about the dystopian healthcare system that we have, right? To now Biden just running away from some of the most popular policies that we've seen in my lifetime, which are these stimulus checks and child tax credit, things that really made a difference for people, things that should have been a lot bigger than they were. But boy, we're fighting for those. Don't sit here and tell me that you need better followers, because it's the leadership, man. It's the leadership. We got to get the, again, we do have to take advantage of the social movements that exist. And we need, as a socialist movement, to find ways to channel that energy into our people and into our movement, and start showing people that you just aren't going to get it from negotiating with these folks, because they will not deliver. LBJ is no socialist, nor a radical. But it's very funny that Paul Begala, in that quote, if you came in late, he says that the Democratic Party doesn't have, has great leaders, but not good followers. And then he tells a story about MLK meeting with LBJ, and MLK looking over and saying, oh, well, we need to take advantage of this moment and get the president some power, right? We should take, utilize the social movements to get what we want. That's not bad analysis from MLK. As I was saying earlier, that's exactly what we would need to do even with Bernie Sanders in the presidency. The difference here is that LBJ was meeting with MLK, not out of the goodness of his heart, but because MLK represented a very, very strong, powerful movement that was a challenge to LBJ and his movement and his party. And he found there was benefit there in trying to work with those folks to the extent that he did. Remember, I don't want people to misremember LBJ either. So the point is that, definitely we should be following these kind of these radical movements that created not just street marches and protests, right? People sometimes think of, the civil rights movement as only just, I don't know, they marched together and everyone showed up. It's like, no, there's a lot of institutional and infrastructural work that need to be done to be able to organize those things in the first place. And that's the kind of work that we need to be doing. Because again, it's just never going to come from the top down. And the people in charge just have no idea what they're doing. Here we go. Tomorrow, we're going to be hanging out with Ben Burgess talking about his new book on Christopher Hitchens. This is Christopher Hitchens, what he got wrong, what he got right, what he got wrong, and what the hell happened, I think. You can find it wherever you find your books. Definitely check out Bookshop, actually. We have a list, too, on our show that you can find. We have a list on Bookshop of Left Reckoning approved books. It's mainly history and political theory, but I think Matt threw in some nice novels in there, too, for y'all to check out. As always, please consider supporting the show at patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We have a lot coming up in the next couple of weeks. I know I'm going to be bringing on, we're not trying to do too many candidate interviews. I'm just going to say, because it's just, I think Majority Report and other programs like that. I also have to remind people, I don't work on the Majority Report. I just want to say that time and time again, because people sometimes think that I do and ask me for things or stuff like that. And I don't work on that project. I know as much about you all do about what's going on there, but I do think there are other programs that are more suited for doing those kind of candidate interviews, because a lot of candidate interviews aren't that interesting. As Michael taught me that. He said, we don't like to do candidate interviews because they're not very interesting, but nonetheless, we'll be doing a couple here on some exciting things happening here in Austin in the next few weeks. We'll have a bonus episode on Sunday, main show tomorrow. Also, we have our call-in system ready. We're doing voicemails right now. Soon we'll be able to do live back and forth, but at least for y'all right now, please go and leave us a voicemail and leave a question for Ben or something like that. I'll put that back up on the number back on the Patreon as soon as I log off, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.